the book title, The Creature from Jekyll Island. I know this is common ground for many of you, but I hope there are many here that don't know what that's all about. What's The Creature from Jekyll Island all about? And I must admit that I had some fun with that title because it has kind of a mysterious sound to it. It sounds like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or it may sound like the creature from the Black Lagoon. And I thought if anybody saw the book in a window of a bookstore, they might get curious, thinking it was a sequel to Jurassic Park. But all kidding aside, the title really does have a great deal of significance because Jekyll Island is a real island. It's off the coast of Georgia, and it was on that island back in 1910, 3 years before the passage of the Federal Reserve Act, which was 1913. But back in 1910, the Federal Reserve System was created in all of its important features. It was designed and created on Jekyll Island in 1910. And when I began to research this subject, I realized that Jekyll Island in those days was privately owned. It was owned by a small group of billionaires from New York, people like John D. Rockefeller, people like J.P. Morgan, their business associates and their friends. This was a privately owned island. It was a resort island, and it's where their families went to spend the cold winter months. And they had beautiful mansions there. They called them cottages, but you can visit the island today, I hope you will, when you're in the area, because those cottages, so-called, are beautiful examples of architecture from that period of history, and they've been most of them anyway, have been restored and maintained by the state of Georgia now. So it's almost like a shrine to these people. But the key structure on the island is the clubhouse, as they called it. In fact, the name of that island and this association which they owned was called the Jekyll Island Club. And they have a beautiful clubhouse, which is now run by the Marriott Hotels. And you can go in there and have a nice lunch. In fact, I was there just a few months ago for a meeting and checked into the hotel and got to stay in one of the rooms. Nice little room. It's quite elegant for the time. But remember, the really big families had their own mansions on the island. But this is a place where visitors could come. So you can visit the island today. And if you do that, and you're leaving the clubhouse, and you go out the back door, just before you go out the back door, turn to your left, and you'll see another door goes to a side room. And on the door, there's a plaque. And it says, the Federal Reserve Room. And if you go in that room, you'll see pictures on the wall of the men, the 7 men, who actually created the Federal Reserve System in that room, in that building back in 1910. And I found that very curious to discover that the Federal Reserve System, which I was given the impression when I was in school was a government agency. I thought that should be created in Washington, D.C. I thought it was strange that here it was on a private island created in this room. And then I discovered what was even more amazing is that the conditions of this meeting were secret. A great deal of secrecy prevailed. The men were told to arrive, back up a little bit, the story begins in November of 1910 when Senator Nelson Aldrich took his private railroad car, you can imagine like having your private Boeing jet today, to the New Jersey Railroad Station. And there it was in readiness for the arrival of himself and 6 other men who were instructed to come to the station, the train station, separately, not to be seen together that night, not to dine together that night, to avoid newspaper reporters at all costs. See, in those days, the reporters used to hang out at the train station because before the era of aircraft, all the dignitaries, all the political figures, all the superstars had to travel by train in and out of New York, and that's where they went. And so they had their version of the paparazzi hanging out in the train station to get a picture and an interview and a statement from all of these dignitaries. And so they were instructed to avoid newspaper reporters at all costs. One of the men carried a shotgun in a big black case, just in case he had been stopped by a reporter and asked where he was going. He was prepared to say that he was going on a duck hunting trip. We find out from his biographer later years, they wrote about this event, and from his children, who also wrote about it, that this man never fired a gun in his life. That was not his shotgun. He had borrowed it from a friend just so he could carry it and use it as a kind of a deception in case he had been asked where he's going. So that was amazing. Once on board the train, the men were told to address each other when talking in the privacy of this railroad car, to address each other with first names only, to avoid using their last names. And in the case of two of these men, they dropped their first names completely and adopted code names in the privacy of the car. I thought that was most strange. And then we find in an article that was published in the Saturday Evening Post, written by one of those participants, he explained why that was. He said they were concerned that the servants on board the train would find out who all of these people were together, and that they were spending some time together and going to Jekyll Island. And although the servants knew the identity of their employer, Senator Aldrich, of course, and might have known the identities of possibly one of the others, they didn't know them all. And it was the leaking of information about all of these people being together that they were concerned about, because they thought that once that information got into the real world out there and possibly be picked up in the press, then the whole purpose of this meeting would be subverted. So that's the kind of secrecy that was brought about this meeting. Even when they got to Jekyll Island, there was 2 nights and a day journey, 1,000 miles to the south. They got off the train, they took a ferry boat across the inland straits to the island and then to this clubhouse. And when they got there, the normal group of employees who worked at the clubhouse had all been dismissed and replaced by temporary employees for exactly the same reason. They didn't want any of the employees leaking information about all of these important people coming together. So there's more to it than that. But when I discovered the secrecy, I couldn't put it down. I thought, you know, when things are done in secret, there's usually something to hide. And I was curious about what it was, and that's what really got me going on my research. I wanted to find out what it was they were trying to hide. And I did find out. And I wrote about it. And I'll tell you in just a minute what it was. It's not that hard to figure out, mainly because it's right in your face. It's like the purloined letter. It's easy to overlook because it's right there in plain view. All right. First, we need to take a look at who these men were.
If you liked this video, we have hundreds of more alternative videos ranging from sexual health to psychology to mind control. So if you liked it, go ahead and click on me to enter the Psyche Truth channel.